Welcome to 2016 presidential candidate interviews. Today I'm interviewing Doug Sabbag. He is running as a Republican. Hello, Mr. Sabbag, and welcome to the interview. How are you doing?
Well, very good. Thank you very much for interviewing me.
Well, thank you for participating. Let's start out with some getting-to-know-you questions so the listeners can get to know you. Describe your family.
Well, my wife and I live in Fort Lauderdale right now, but I was born in and initially brought up in Boston, Massachusetts, and I have lived in Northern and Southern California, Maine, Indianapolis, Texas. As I mentioned, we're in Fort Lauderdale now, living on a sailboat on the New River in Fort Lauderdale. I have a daughter who has two sons and a husband, and they live in Maine.
Describe your employment and work history.
Well, over the course of my adult life, I have had a wide variety of jobs, including everything from dishwashing in restaurants and security guard and roofer and yacht maintenance work. I've been a vacuum cleaner salesman, a waiter, a host at Illegal Seafood in Boston. I was in the U.S. Army. I have an honorable discharge. I was a photographer for a long time, even owned a photography retail outlet. But then I returned to school, and I learned how to be a computer consultant, which I've been doing for many years. And most recently, my wife and I own a sailboat chartering enterprise here in Fort Lauderdale, where we take people out for cruises on the ocean. So I bring a wide variety of first-hand experience to represent many different people's interests and issues on a very personally knowledgeable basis.
Sounds good. What are your hobbies and interests?
Well, first and foremost, I enjoy, and my wife does too, we both enjoy sailing. We have a beautiful catch-rigged sailboat named the Triumph, which we love taking on long blue water cruises. But I also enjoy playing tennis and snow skiing and just traveling as much as possible.
Do you have a favorite place to eat out when you're not in the water?
Well, my wife and I enjoy, when we want a steak, we'll go to a place, and there's a chain of them in the country called Ruth's Chris. They have a delicious filet mignon. But here in Fort Lauderdale, if we want a crab feast, we'll enjoy a taste of the old Florida at a restaurant called the Rustic Inn. It's delicious.
Do you have a favorite fast food joint?
I try to avoid them, but if I had to, either a KFC or an Arby's.
Favorite junk food?
Beef jerky would probably be the choice on that.
Favorite TV show and movies?
Well, we've watched a lot of the various crime shows, like NYPD and all the CSI shows. And lately, the Sherlock Holmes, I think it's called Elementary, and then there's Bones. My wife has been watching numerous cooking shows like Chopped, those sort of movies, shows. But for movies, the high-action, science fiction type movies like Iron Man, Star Trek, Mission Impossible, I enjoy those a lot.
Do you have any pets?
Not now, now that we are on a sailboat. I have had a couple German Shepherds in the past.
And the final icebreaker question. Name a song that you consider a life anthem, a motto, something that describes you.
Well, the best that comes to mind is I Did It My Way by Frank Sinatra.
Okay, now on to the issues-based questions. Why are you running for president?
Well, to start off with, I have a lot of great ideas that I think we really need to institute in this country, and I don't see anybody else doing it. So really, because nobody else is doing this, that's why I'm running. But over the course of my whole life, I've witnessed one administration after another promising to accomplish many, many things, and yet accomplishing practically none of them. It's become apparent that these career politicians are apparently bought and paid for by various special interests, and I'm hoping to break through that stalemate. So rather than just sit back and watch another cycle come and go like that, I decided to write a book based upon common sense, without any outside influences and special interests, of what I would do if given the chance to be the president. It's called Rebuilding the United States, and I see those goals as critical for me to accomplish for everyone's betterment, including our own. So to sum it up, as I said before, I'm running because nobody else is offering to accomplish what we, the general public, need to get done.
What abilities would you bring to the office of president?
Well, I have a wide range of experience, including systems design. I've had many management positions within that data processing curve, vice president, president of different companies, administrative, technical, and team member experience, which all included a lot of business experience. I have owned a restaurant and things like that. I believe I have what would work to lead our government and people toward a better future because of this wide variety of hands-on experience. As I said, I've done everything from the dishwasher to the president of a company, and I'm currently a U.S. Coast Guard certified captain. So I think that wide range of experience ties in very well with what our forefathers said was what would really be the best type of person to be in the government. Citizens with basic experience in life. That's what I bring to the table.
Name a president or two you have a favorable opinion of and who you would want to emulate as far as maybe a few aspects of their administration, a few aspects of how they do things.
Well, the first one that comes to mind is Thomas Jefferson, because besides common sense, I believe justice for all is critically important to be applied, and he embodied that if anyone did. And there's John Kennedy, because he dared to question the powers that be, which sadly cost him dearly. I would hope wouldn't cost me as much. But those would be my two top-flight presidents.
Are there any presidents you have a less than favorable opinion of who have aspects of their presidency you would not want to emulate?
Well, for the more contemporary presidents, Bill Clinton comes to mind. Because most of the positive things that happened in America, which were attributed to him, were really gains made as of dividends of the end of the Cold War. And then while he had that great opportunity to take advantage of the end of the Cold War, he basically threw it all away by dragging us all through the mud with his personal issues there. So he would be one I would most not want to emulate.
Are there any functions of government you would like to decrease or even abolish?
Well, the first one that comes to mind is the federal income tax system. I would replace that with a federal sales tax system in order to better balance the tax load from the current shoulders of the W-2 employees to those who spend the most money, which would be corporations, big spenders. The corporations are getting away without paying very much in income tax, while the W-2 employees are actually paying 80% of what the government's receipts are from the current income tax system. So that's why I would, if you could say abolish it, at the very least I'd replace it with the system that I've designed and I described in my book.
Are there any functions of government you'd like to add to, increase? Is there anything not in existence that should be in existence?
Well, also as I mentioned in my book, I would basically combine Medicare, Medicaid, and the Veterans Administration, the Veterans Health Administration. What we're spending now on all of those, I would combine into a universal health care medical program where everybody would be covered. We're spending $900 billion a year as it is on those three programs, and we're not really getting the most bang for the buck, so to speak. If we had a single-payer system, we would save 25% right off the top of all the medical dollars we're spending right now, and that would greatly decrease the overall cost so that we wouldn't have to add that much more to the amount we're spending in order to cover everybody. So that would be one. Another area I would greatly increase the government's involvement in would be in providing online, free, basically through the community college system, education and training programs. I think we really need to address that And currently we have a lot of students graduating with huge student loan debt. And I don't think that that's very conducive to our upcoming workers and professionals in this country. So those would be the two areas I would really expand quite a bit.
Where do you stand on the abortion pro-choice issue?
I would back and start off with, though I am running as a Republican, I do not support any of the Republican family values, issues, or goals, since I don't believe that those are any business of the U.S. government. So within that, I would say that I support, I can't really say I support abortion, but I am pro-choice. I do believe it should be up to the individual. We don't really have an alternative to that. If you made it illegal, people would still do it, and then we'd have a lot of emergencies with women having these alley or the illegal abortion. So we really have to be realistic about that and continue to control it in a medical environment.
What role should our military play in the world?
Well, I'd like to see it greatly reduced. We're trying to be the police of the world, and we're spending way too much money. Too many resources are unquestionably directed that way. When the price of one F-35 is over $250 million, I think that's just obscene. To go back to how much would the cost of my community college programs for everybody, that would be roughly $90 million, and so the price of one F-35 would more than cover that. So I would greatly reduce our role, but I would try to, as we've heard before, redesign it into a more efficient, faster reacting force than we have right now.
How would you handle immigration and border security?
Primarily by just better enforcement of the current laws. But tying into how I would change the military that we have in the world, I would bring the military personnel that we have stationed in Germany, Korea, and Japan, I would bring them all home and station them on our southern border for the most part. Maybe some up by Canada, just to balance it. But, so that would be how I would address it. But enforcing the current laws, but with a much greater presence on the border.
How do you perceive the issue of race and discrimination in America? Do we still face challenges?
Well, we sure do, don't we? In fact, lately, Mr. Trump and even Mr. Carson are playing those cards, trying to point fingers at Mexicans and Muslims. I feel, as I've mentioned earlier, that justice for all really has to continue to be the baseline of the United States of America, and I would strongly push for even expanding that principle throughout everything I did. We do have a big issue with discrimination. It's too easily being used by some other candidates to draw up support for their own candidacy. So I'm really very upset with that. I would also strongly support the equal pay for equal work that is currently being discussed for women. I don't think that they're being properly addressed.
What role should the federal government play in healthcare?
As I mentioned earlier, I think a much greater and much more efficient role with the universal healthcare system. Most countries of the world, and especially all of the industrialized ones, already have a universal healthcare type of program in place. And I think it's kind of ludicrous that we're pandering to Blue Cross Blue Shield, Aetna, and all these other insurance companies, and allowing them to keep their fingers in the pie when we should be smarter than that and do what would be the best thing for the people in a universal healthcare type system.
What priority would you give repair of infrastructure, and what role should the federal government play in maintaining infrastructure?
Well, currently we're using the federal tax from fuel, that would be either diesel or gasoline, to support the infrastructure, the roads and the highways and the bridges. And it's become obvious that that is not a sufficient revenue stream to cover those costs. So I would, initially, we have to spend, I think there are estimates out there of $90 billion to bring the bridges and highways back to an acceptable condition. I would push very strongly for us to do it. I don't think we have an alternative. Allowing these things to go into disrepair can easily cost people lives. So we just can't debate that. It's simply something that has to be addressed. And then on the go forward, I think we have to put in place some other way of financing the support of the infrastructure, the maintenance and the support of it.
Some people think there's a conflict of interest between gathering intelligence to fight terror and maintaining personal liberties like privacy. Do you think there is a conflict? And if yes, how do you find the proper balance between the two?
Well, I do believe there's a conflict around. Since 9/11, I've said to many people that it appears as though fear is now in the driver's seat. So an awful lot of people seem to be quite willing to give up what is the basis of our Constitution, and that would be individual rights, in order to, in theory, better provide some sort of defense and security for the group. And as much as I can understand that, along with people who say, well, if you haven't done anything wrong, you should have nothing to worry about being examined by the government. But I don't believe that that's really the right path to follow. I think we do have to stick to our Constitution and further support individual rights. And so I do not support how far we're going in our out of fear.
Be a forecaster. Predict maybe one or two major problems facing our nation in the future that very few people are talking about. What would you do to prepare our nation?
Well, I think that we're really hurting the middle class. And it started, actually Kennedy started with giving up the tariffs for bringing in foreign goods, and then it was greatly expanded by NAFTA and our participation in the World Trade Organization and giving China most favored nation status. We have to support American manufacturing. 68% of our workforce does not have a college education or thereabouts. And the concept that we don't need to have American manufacturing jobs is really a very unhealthy direction for us to go in. I think that as we've all witnessed, the middle class is being diminished and is losing that ability to enjoy it's a nebulous concept, but the American dream. I think we need to bring that back. I think we need to rescind our participation in NAFTA, WTO, and stop the most favored nation status trading, put back in tariffs, and make manufacturing in America something that's really viable again. I think that's very important for the health of our country.
Next question. Everybody has things they're good at and things they're not so good at. What are some of the things you may be not so good at, and what would you do to compensate for those?
Well, obviously I don't have any experience with the Congress, the Senate, and those kind of people, so I'd have a lot to learn on exactly how to interact with them. I do have a plan of how to resolve the Do-Nothing Congress. It's sort of a 1-2 punch, and I have to confirm that this would work, but from what I can see, from what I've been able to find out in research, if we had votes or referendums on a national basis with no teeth to them, but just to find out what the will of the people is on, let's say, my new tax ideas, I could then use that as a inspiration to the congressional members, whether they be senators or congresspeople, to get them to actually act on it so that they would be fulfilling their duty of acting as a representative of the will of their people, of their constituents. So I still have a lot to learn of exactly how I would accomplish that and inspiration, if you will, of our Congress.
Are there any other issues you would like to discuss that have not been covered?
I think you've covered the majority of them. I do want to say, I would also, as far as our foreign policy, I think that needs to be readdressed, specifically in who we have alliances with. We currently, in the Middle East, are having a lot of problems over there, and I think that our previous habit of supporting the wrong, I shouldn't call it habit, our policy of supporting the wrong entities. For instance, back in the 1950s, we supported replacing the democratically elected president, or whatever it was, of Iran with what became known as the Shah of Iran, so that we would obtain better oil contracts. Well, that's a heinous thing for any country to do to another country. And we barely ever talk about that. Very few people were even aware of the fact that we did that. The Shah of Iran that we instituted there proceeded to use a group called Sabbag, which was his own little domestic group that actually used torture to maintain his control of the people. It took quite a few years for the Iranians to finally oust him and replace him with, granted it was a severe swing of the pendulum to get the Ayatollah and that whole mechanism in place. Excuse me. But nevertheless, the United States of America, was responsible for that sort of an intrusion into that government. And they didn't forget it as well as we've made a great effort to forget that. And so when we see the signs in Iran that say that they hate Americans and things like that, it's understandable considering what we did, how we intruded on them. And besides Iran, we've done that with we're again supporting a number of other entities that we shouldn't have supported, or things that we're doing over there that we shouldn't be doing, if we followed our own principles of justice for all, rather than allowed greed to supersede those American principles in our interactions over there. So I would change our foreign policy quite a bit in the Middle East so that we didn't earn as many enemies as we're currently earning. And in fact, we would hopefully gain respect from the people, if not the actual tyrants and erroneous leaders. We would at least gain respect from the people. And I think that's more important than making friends with the monarchy of Saudi Arabia, the House of Saud, or using that as an example. So that would be the major thing I would do that would be different.
Okay. Time for some closing remarks. In 2 minutes or less, tell us why we should vote for you.
Well, I believe I'm the only candidate of the people who has absolutely no other influences which would keep me from representing the best interests of the general public of the United States of America. I would do everything that I'm interested in doing in as much of a nonpartisan method as possible. And as I discussed earlier, I have a very specific plan of how to inspire our DoNothing Congress into doing something, into doing many things for us. And I think that our country really needs our Congress to work for them, and I think it really needs a president who isn't being either kept down or in one way or another kept from doing what he sees as something that should be done. As I mentioned, I would use referendum votes, not just to force what I want to do on the country, but to learn what the people want to do. So I would, in effect, push the country very slightly in the direction of a pure democracy, rather than remaining in this representative democracy that, to be honest with you, is not working. So there are some very major shifts that I would bring to the office, and I think that they're quite worthwhile the people considering as a viable reason to vote for me versus all the other candidates who are really just replaying the past, which I think we're done with.
Okay, thank you again for participating in this interview. Thank you to my listeners for listening. Be sure to check back in the future for more interviews. Be sure to keep informed and keep involved. Thanks again for the interview.
Thank you very, very much. I greatly appreciate your time.